PTSD, or what I call Persistent Enslavement Systemic Trauma, PEST. We often use a label of PTSD to describe the situation or the condition of Black people in America and throughout the globe, people of African descent. But what's not taken into consideration is that we cannot use the oppressor's term to describe the phenomena that happens to people of African descent.
Music by D-U-D-E.
Speak Black to Me. Speak Black to Me, a dynamic space of Black discourse where we engage in the process of elevating and transforming the mind. Speak Black to Me is a space where we come together to transform and transcend our given condition, to be and to become more powerful. Speak Black to Me. The liberated zone of intellect, of insight and inspiration. It's called Speak Black to Me.
See, post-traumatic stress disorder means that someone has been through some experience that is traumatic. They have either seen death, been threatened by death, or tormented by the thoughts of death or danger, or have some debilitating condition from the anxiety of the phenomena that is life-threatening. So when we say post, we mean that it has gone by, it is over, but the trauma encountered by people of African descent has lasted for over 500 years. We want to talk about 400 years of enslavement, but the conditions that were set in place to make enslavement even possible was over 100 years of endeavor by the European traducers. See, the traumatic encounter of people of African descent has never been remitting. It has never stopped. It is ongoing. Therefore, it cannot be considered to be PTSD as in post, because we have never entered into a post moment. When you talk about the trauma caused by enslavement, the trauma caused by raping, maiming somebody, lynching, castrating individuals, the trauma caused by the prison industrial complex or the prisoner lending program that followed right after the ending of enslavement in this country. So it was slavery by another name, the Jim Crow laws, the redlining, the black codes. All of these things have been elements of trauma for people of African descent. See, so when you use PTSD as in post, you have to ask yourself, when have we had a period of time of no trauma? Another problem with applying PTSD is that the traumatic experiences have been unique to the African experience. That is that there have been some unique conditions affiliated with some elements of who we are and how we function that we cannot escape from. So when we talk about trauma, at some level, when we have a trauma from an earthquake or a trauma from some natural disaster, one can separate themselves from the event because the event was a thing that was debilitating or was unsettling. And so the event has passed. The hurricane has passed. The earthquake is over. The tsunami has dissipated. And so there is a separation from the thing, and therefore one can recover at a different level or different rate than when it is caused by some other internal factor. For example, raping someone, the person is consistently reminded of the body part that was violated, and so they have a recurring element of the trauma or the traumatic experience. But even then, there is a post because the raping or the violation is not taking place at that time. But when it comes to looking at trauma in the African context, the thing that seems to be the most prevailing phenomena that yields one to want to come after another group is skin color, or some other element that seems to mark a population to be distinct from Europeans. And unlike the trauma caused by an earthquake, one can separate themselves from that. Or even talking about the violation, the sexual violation, one can begin to move through the phenomena of not being violated again if they find themselves in a safe space. One cannot escape the skin color, the thing that makes one black and or African by phenotype. And this is the thing that seems to be the most alarming for the individuals who met out the trauma to people of African descent. See, when we talk about trauma, it has to be something that we can move through, that we can somehow gain some agency over to be able to heal from. But this idea of trauma in the African context is ongoing. It is not post. It is really a phenomenon of terroristic acts meted out to a population that leads to economic disenfranchisement, political crippling of a population. See, Dr. George Grew Leary came up with the term post-traumatic slavery syndrome. And she defines the condition of a population that has encountered something from the centuries of enslavement, or she says slavery, and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism today. She's right when she says that it's ongoing today. The issue is that it is not post. She further asserts that there is a belief that, real or imagined, the benefits of the society in which they live are not accessible to them, which means then that if it is not accessible, then it cannot be post because one is disenfranchised perpetually, and that is a persisting phenomenon. It is an ongoing phenomenon. It hasn't changed. The idea of human beingness is under examination or evaluation at all times. See, when we talk about PTSS, the basic primary construct is that the beingness is the problem, has been challenged, and that there's a way to somehow rearrange, reorganize the beingness of an individual. It assumes that the trauma was mostly physical with psychological underpinnings, and that the absence of the physical torture and abuse, that the trauma then has stopped. It assumes that after enslavement, the trauma ceased to exist for the most part, and African people are in a moment or a period of post-trauma. But when we look at the deaths of Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and unfortunately the names continue to go on and on. The issue or question is, where is that post moment? Since people of African descent experience racial discrimination, racial harassment, deprivation, disenfranchisement, dehumanization, despiritualization, our trauma is ongoing. The fact that an individual could place their knee on someone's neck in broad daylight for 8 minutes and 46 seconds speaks to the element of dehumanization that that entity on the ground had. But it also speaks to an element of inhumane action by the one who put the knee on that person's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So the Zulu talk about ukufa kwabantu, or metaphysical illnesses of the people. So they suggest that there's certain things that happen uniquely to people of African descent. And the healing of those people must be consistent with their worldview. So we must not use the oppressor's terminology to describe our African phenomena. See, we have African protracted Ma'afa stress. That is the Ma'afa, which is the human suffering of people of African descent at the hands of Europeans, not the slave trade idea that people want to throw out there quite often. They want to talk about the African slave trade. It sounds like trading baseball cards, that one has Kendrick Griffey Jr. and Darryl Strawberry, and there's some trade. If there's a trade, there has to be some mutual benefit for both parties. That is a trade. But when you talk about human trafficking with no comeback, nothing came back to African people from that. People won't even suggest that, well, Africans sold other Africans into slavery. Well, that doesn't make sense when you talk about selling and trading when there should have been some financial benefit to the population on the other side. Where is the economy in Africa that has benefited from the exportation of its inhabitants? There is no benefit. And if that was the case, then there should still be elements of oppression and human denigration on the continent of people that look like one another. And it doesn't happen in a broad area or broad level like it did among the Europeans who exported people of African descent. So we talk about African protracted Ma'afa stress. People talk about the middle passage, like walking down a hallway. It was not a walk down a hallway. Walking down a hallway is a middle passage. We're talking about the Ma'afa, the trauma, the tragic experience of African people at the hands of Europeans. Because Europe was involved in the process, in the economic advantage of the process. Where are the enslavement ships that were built by people of African descent that exported individuals into these very spaces? Where did that occur? Where is the community in these places of Brazil and in Jamaica and in the United States and wherever else we find African people? Where is the community of people that sold African into enslavement? Where are the Africans benefiting financially from that exportation? You can't describe it. You can't find it. This is why I suggest that the term persistent enslavement systemic trauma be utilized as opposed to post. It is an African transgenerational trauma that is pervasive in all walks of life of people of African descent. See, with PEST, the emphasis is placed on the systemic trauma that has residual effects upon the daily activities of African people. This systemic trauma impacts the names that we give one another, the foods that we eat, the schools that we attend. It impacts how we interact with one another. It is ever present in our lives. It impacts the way that we socialize our children. We talk about having children to leave out and hope that they come back home safely. So we just say, I just want to see you come home safely. That is a traumatic experience. We know that the certain names that we give our children may mean that they may not be treated fairly in school. So we have to think about the names we give our children. We think about the clothes that we wear on a day-to-day basis. That is a traumatic experience because I need to find ways to keep the resources coming into my space. That is not post. That is persistent. We think about how we wear our hair. We'd have a whole discussion about good hair and bad hair. That's a traumatic experience because I don't want to go anywhere with my hair looking all African. Well, something's wrong with that. Because if you say that you love God or you love yourself, then you have to love what comes out of you. It is what it is. It does what it does. Now, you can modify it. You can wax it, shave it, wave it, relax it. You still got to find a way to love it. See, the outcome of this perpetual, persistent enslavement, systemic trauma is that we find ways to survive and we end up having ill health markers. See, when we talk about high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, mental unrest, these are the influences of racism. So our bodies are never at rest. We're at a fight or flight moment on a continuum. That's persistent. That is ongoing. That is not post. So the body is in a fight or flight moment. Increasing adrenaline within the bloodstream. Increased adrenaline in the bloodstream over a period of time causes a lot of challenges in the body. It may actually cause the renal system to be taxed. Therefore, we have kidney issues. You have high blood pressure. Over a period of time, cortisol builds up in the arteries as a byproduct of the adrenaline, and as a result, it causes plaque in the arteries to build, and therefore the heart has to work harder to pump past this plaque, and therefore you have hypertension and high blood pressure. You have diabetes associated with the excessive elements of adrenaline within the bloodstream. And you ask the question, what is killing us? What is killing us quickly? It goes back to racism and oppression. It goes back to the terroristic acts of white supremacy. PEST, Persistent Enslavement Systemic Trauma. See, this trauma has to be looked at a deeper level. Diaz and Resler in 2014 did a research study. I had to find this research study published where they had these mice that had experienced a shock along with a particular odor. And thus, whenever they had the whiff of this odor, they associated it with the shock. They found that the mice would have pups that would not be shocked, but get the whiff of the odor. And their bodies would have a visceral response as if they had been shocked like their parents. They found that these pups would grow up and have pups, offspring. Give them the whiff of the special odor, and the mice would have a visceral response, a bodily response, as if they had been shocked, and yet they had never been shocked. See, a part of the trauma had been transmitted genetically, that there was an automatic coping mechanism from the trauma from the grandparent mouse. Now, we're not saying that we are as minuscule as mice or that we have the same system, but we want to know that there is some kinship in the fact that we are mammals. And the kinship means that there's something that may be similar in the processes. So we can't use the prefix post because it alludes to a period of time where we're beyond the trauma, when much of what we encounter is transgenerational trauma that is still in our systems. But Resler told me that he also did a study where they found ways to cope with the traumatic experience or with the odor. And that coping mechanism was transmitted generationally or genetically. So we have the capacity to transmit some healing as well. But it all comes from how we begin to address the situation in the here and now. So we're not at a space where we can utilize the language of the oppressor and talk about post when we're not in a post moment. When we have attacks on all ends at all times, we're not in a post moment. When we have Colin Kaepernick being attacked on his job for using the voice that he has to bring attention to a situation in the community, that is not a post moment because he lost his livelihood in order to make a statement about the humanity of people that look like him. When Malcolm Jenkins stood by him and how individuals were challenged for doing so. That means that we're not in a post moment. When individuals are constantly trying to find ways to measure the words that they use around European people so that they don't cause any disruption in the environment, or find ways to navigate a soft shoe through situations so that they don't become seen as a problem. I don't want to be seen as the angry Negro, the angry black woman, the problem black man. That's an issue because that is a moment of trauma, to find ways to try to get along with everybody, to even try to figure out, do I even wear a Black Lives Matter shirt because it could be problematic for me? That's trauma. Just to say that I matter is traumatic. And here we want to say that there's a post period. It's not post, people. This is persistent enslavement systemic trauma It is an ongoing phenomenon that we must address from our unique perspective, one step at a time. And the first part of that particular address, the first step, is to acknowledge the fact that we have been identified as somebody's enemy every single day of our lives. Whether we are seen as enemy is manifested in the way that we receive health care that is not up to standard, where blacks can go in and identify some symptoms that may be seen as indigestion issues, but a white male can say have the same symptoms uttered and be immediately admitted for a heart attack into a hospital. That is not the same thing. Whether we talk about law and how the law tends to single out people of African descent unjustly, or in education, where we have a pipeline to prison because of the ill treatment of children in school. Juwanda Kajufu told us years ago about the fourth grade failure syndrome and how black boys begin to shut down by the third grade, and then you have them failing in the fourth grade, and that is an indicator to some as to how many prison beds to build by determining how many individuals are not doing well in elementary school, because the projection is that they will end up in the penal system either on probation, parole, or incarcerated. The law, education, health, all of these areas have contributed to and contribute to the ongoing trauma that we must address. We first must acknowledge that someone has identified us as their enemy. The second thing is that we must begin to examine our responses to this process. That is, how have we been adjusting to being someone's enemy? Have we turned in on one another? Do we talk about and backbite, and do we berate one another? Do we find ways to appease the power structure so that we can get through the moment, and so we sell out someone else that looks like us? And do we become other than black so that we're not associated with those Negroes, right? Do we find ways to dissociate ourselves from the thing that may cause us pain? Or do we turn and embrace the power of who we really are? How have we been responding and reacting to the shock of the terror caused by white supremacist thoughts? Thirdly, we must recognize that we come from a great, mighty, powerful, and resilient people. Didn't say perfect, said powerful. That we are the children of those who would not die. That we continue to exist. That we continue to thrive. That we continue to do things globally so they kill one and others continue to rise. That we are the children of those that would not die. You can't destroy that which you did not create. And so the spirit that is around us at this time, the spirit of resistance, the spirit of revolution is real. It's not the people, it's spirit. We must recognize that. Fourthly, the power of our spiritual beingness, the power of who we are as eternal, that we are the children of those that would not die, and that there's something within us that has been here for generations and now is a wake-up call. We must wake up and rise in the power of being. And fifthly, we must take that beingness and know who our open enemy is, and use that power to destroy the impact and the influence of our open enemy on our beingness, intellectually, in health, in politics, in all the areas. We must apply the pressure to destroy that which has been trying to destroy us for years. That's what we do. That's the burning and looting. Burning and looting thoughts and ideas of our inferiority and their superiority. Burning and looting the thoughts of their institutions being better. There are no institutions in this country without the African genius. You don't get a potato chip, a baby carriage, a pen, a lubricated engine, convertible top, cataract surgery, cell phone technology. None of that without the genius that runs in the veins of people of African descent. An air conditioner, an elevator, electric lights, none of it. Stoplight does not exist without the genius of people of African descent. We must recognize that power that will not be destroyed is within us. We must embrace it, love it, nurture it, share it, and then go do something with it. It is build a better world. Speak black to me.